You do what you have to do for tuition, right? At least, that's the mantra I kept repeating as the grumbling service elevator descended, taking me deeper into the bowels of Garrison University's oldest, most Gothic-looking building. $18 an hour. That was the magic number keeping me tethered to this opportunity. The night shift cataloging job in the sub-basement archive. My name's Leo, third-year history major, and my bank account currently resembled a barren historical landscape, lots of dust, no treasure. So, yeah, $18 an hour to sit alone underground with dead paper sounded like a pretty sweet deal compared to ramen number 5 for the week. The archive wasn't just in the basement, it was under it. Sub-basement. 2 levels below ground, a concrete tomb accessed either by this wheezing metal box or a set of narrow, echoing stairs that smelled faintly of damp and despair. Dr. Albright, the head archivist, a woman so frail and pale she looked like she might crumble into dust herself if you sneezed too hard, had given me the daytime tour. Even with the regular overhead lights on, the place had an oppressive quality. Rows upon rows of towering, grey metal shelves stretched into dimmer recesses, packed tight with faded boxes and binders. Filing cabinets, ancient metal beasts older than my parents, stood sentinel in shadowed corners. The air was thick with the scent of decaying paper, a dry, slightly sweet smell mixed with something sharper, vaguely chemical, preservation fluids, maybe? Or just a century of accumulated institutional neglect. It's straightforward work, Leo, she chirped, her voice like rustling leaves. Elias, the previous student assistant, kept meticulous records. Just pick up where he left off in the logbook. Log the box contents, assign a shelf number, note any damage. Simple. She gestured vaguely towards the endless rows. Your shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You'll be quite alone down here, of course, but campus security does rounds topside every few hours, so you're perfectly safe. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, which darted nervously towards the darker corners of the archive. She led me to a small, cluttered metal desk crammed into a space near the entrance, almost swallowed by the shadow of a particularly looming shelf stacked high with oversized ledgers. A cheap gooseneck lamp, an old logbook, a half-empty box of index cards, and a rotary phone that looked like a museum piece sat on its surface. Everything you need is right here. Keycard gets you in and operates the elevator after hours, she said, handing me the plastic card. And, one more thing. She hesitated, then rummaged under a precarious stack of manila folders, pulling out a yellowed, slightly grimy index card encased in cheap, peeling laminate. Elias left this. He encountered some peculiarities during the night shift. Quirks of an old building, I suppose. She offered the card to me, avoiding my gaze. He was quite adamant that his replacement follow these suggestions. Said it made things smoother. Her eagerness to leave was palpable. She practically fluttered towards the elevator as soon as the card was in my hand. Just lock up when you leave. Have a productive night. And then she was gone, the elevator doors groaning shut behind her. My first night began under the stark, unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights. Down here, the muffled sounds of campus life, distant traffic, late-night students, vanished completely. The silence was immense, broken only by the low, resonant hum of the industrial-sized dehumidifier unit somewhere in the back and the occasional tick-tick flicker of the aging lights overhead. It felt less like a library basement and more like a bunker, sealed off from the living world. I found Elias's logbook easily enough. It was a substantial ledger, bound in worn black faux leather. His handwriting, as Albright had said, was neat, almost unnervingly precise, filling half the pages with careful notations about architectural plans from the 1920s. He'd stopped mid-sentence, describing blueprint #47B. Seemed straightforward. Then, I picked up the laminated card. The typing was old, slightly uneven, like it came from a manual typewriter. Night Shift Protocols, Sub-Basement Archive. If you hear whistling between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., proceed immediately to the stairwell entrance and wait until it stops. Do not use the elevator during this time. The sound travels. The filing cabinets in row G, see map on reverse, are strictly off-limits after midnight. Do not attempt to open them for any reason, even if, especially if, you hear rattling from inside. Assume it's rats, even if it doesn't sound like rats. If any box on the isolated shelf 13C, back wall, near damp patch, appears to have moved, even slightly, log the time and specific box. Do not touch it or attempt to move it back. Leave it for the day's shift. Do not investigate further. Ignore any scent of lavender, particularly if it seems strong or out of place. It is a sensory anomaly. It is not real. Do not follow it. If the lights flicker rhythmically, pattern, on, pause, repeat, immediately turn off your desk lamp and sit perfectly still in the dark. Do not move or make any sound, including breathing loudly, until they return to normal steady illumination. Allow at least 1 full minute of steady light before moving. Security does not patrol the sub-basement at night. Dr. Albright is misinformed or mistaken. If you see or hear anyone identifying themselves as security after 10 p.m., it is not security. Lock yourself in the small office, processing room B, immediately using the internal deadbolt. Do not respond to them. Do not come out until 6 a.m. sharp, regardless of what you hear. I read the list through twice, then a third time, a slow chill creeping up my spine despite the climate control. Whistling that travels. Rattling cabinets that aren't rats. Moving boxes you can't touch. Phantom lavender. Rhythmic light signaling. What? And fake security guards? This felt less like building quirks and more like the setup for a low-budget horror movie. It has to be a prank, I reasoned, trying to shake off the unease. Elias, the meticulous note-keeper, probably had a twisted sense of humor. He's the new guy. Still, the specificity of the rules, the almost desperate tone of some of them, especially if, do not investigate further, regardless of what you hear, it felt unsettlingly genuine. But the rent wasn't going to pay itself, and the $18 an hour felt very real. I decided, somewhat reluctantly, to play along, at least for now. Couldn't hurt to be cautious, right? I carefully tucked the laminated card into the front pocket of the current logbook, marking Elias's last entry. I pulled up my rolling chair, switched on the gooseneck lamp, casting a small pool of warm light on the desk, and reached for the box Elias had been working on. Time to catalogue. But as I opened the lid and inhaled the dry scent of century-old paper, the silence of the archive seemed to press in, heavier now, watchful, and definitely feeling a little less empty than before. The first few hours were unnervingly normal, almost disappointingly so after reading Elias's bizarre list. I fell into a rhythm, pull a box, carefully open its brittle lid, sift through blueprints yellowed like old teeth, correspondence penned in elegant, spidery script, or photographs of stern-faced university founders staring out from the past. Log the contents, assign the shelf number, move to the next box. The only sounds were the rustle of ancient paper, the scritch of my pen in the logbook, and the ever-present, low hum of the dehumidifier, a mechanical beast lurking somewhere in the deeper rows. My desk lamp cast a solitary circle of light, pushing back against the vast, encompassing darkness of the archive. The silence was profound, The kind that makes your ears ring slightly, amplifying every tiny creak of the building or distant gurgle of pipes. I almost managed to convince myself Elias's list was just an elaborate practical joke, a way to spook the new night shift worker. Maybe he'd rigged up a speaker somewhere? Set a timer? The thought was almost comforting. Then, around 1:15 a.m., I remember glancing at the clock on my phone, noting the time. I heard it. It started faintly, barely audible over the dehumidifier's drone. A high-pitched, thin sound, like air escaping a pinhole, but melodic. A whistle. It wasn't a recognizable tune, just a wandering sequence of notes, rising and falling without pattern. It seemed to be coming from somewhere down the long, shadowed aisles to my left, near the older section with the wooden shelves I hadn't ventured into yet. My blood turned instantly cold. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I froze mid-motion, a delicate blueprint half unrolled in my hands. I strained to listen, holding my breath. It wasn't the wind, the archive was sealed tight, 2 levels underground. It wasn't the pipes, this had a distinct, deliberate quality, however tuneless. Rule 1, if you hear whistling between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., proceed immediately to the stairwell entrance and wait until it stops. Do not use the elevator during this time. The sound travels. My heart kicked into overdrive, hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Okay, maybe it's just airflow? My rational mind scrabbled for an explanation. Some weird acoustic effect. But the whistling continued, seeming to drift slightly, growing marginally louder. It echoed strangely off the hard concrete floor and the tightly packed shelves, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact source. The sound wasn't cheerful or jaunty, it was eerie, aimless, like someone utterly lost or profoundly bored was wandering the labyrinthine rows, whistling to themselves in the dark. Someone who absolutely shouldn't be here. Screw this. Prank or weird acoustics, Elias's warning was flashing in my mind like a neon sign. The sound travels. What did that even mean? Was it moving? Or did the sound itself just permeate the space? I wasn't waiting around to find out. I carefully placed the blueprint back in its box. The sudden urge to be neat and orderly felt absurd, but I did it anyway. Then, pushing my chair back silently, I stood up. My legs felt stiff, reluctant. I forced myself to walk, not run, towards the far end of the archive where the heavy steel door led to the concrete stairwell, right next to the silent, forbidden service elevator. Every footstep seemed deafening on the concrete floor. The whistling seemed to follow me, swirling around, sometimes sounding closer, sometimes farther away, but always there. I reached the stairwell door, its cold metal handle slippery in my sweaty palm. I pushed through it, stepping onto the small, bare concrete landing at the bottom of the steps that led up into darkness. I pulled the heavy door almost shut behind me, leaving just a sliver of a gap, maybe an inch wide, so I could peek out and, more importantly, listen. From the relative safety of the stairwell, the whistling sounded clearer, less distorted by the rows of shelves. It definitely seemed to be moving. I heard it approach the area where my desk was located, linger there for a moment, could it see my lamp was still on? Then fade slightly as if it had turned down another aisle, perhaps heading towards the mysterious row G or the foreboding shelf 13C. The tune, if you could call it that, remained aimless, unsettling. A series of notes that seemed to have no beginning and no end, just an endless, wandering melody that scraped against my nerves. It went on for what felt like an eternity. My muscles ached from standing tense and still. I kept glancing at my phone screen through the crack, 1:18 a.m. 1:20 a.m. 1:23 a.m. 5 minutes felt like 50. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the whistling stopped. Mid-note, it just cut out. The silence that rushed back in was almost deafening, leaving a ringing in my ears. I waited, every nerve screaming, listening for anything, footsteps, the creak of a shelf, breathing. Nothing. Just the low, monotonous hum of the dehumidifier reasserting its presence, seeming louder now in the absence of the whistle. I waited another full minute, maybe two, heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Still nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed the heavy steel door open wider and peered out into the main archive space. The long aisle stretched before me, bathed in the inconsistent fluorescent glow. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Empty. Silent. Still. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I stepped back into the archive, letting the stairwell door click softly shut behind me. I walked slowly back towards my desk, my eyes scanning the shadowed gaps between the shelves, half expecting a figure to step out, or the whistling to start again right behind me. It didn't. I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline ebbing away, leaving me feeling weak and nauseous. Was it just the building? Old pipes carrying sound in strange ways? Or had Elias rigged something elaborate? But the rule. The sound travels. It felt too specific, too knowing. I glanced at the logbook, flipping back through Elias's precise entries again. Box numbers, dates, careful descriptions of contents. Utterly mundane. No mention of whistling, no hint of rattling cabinets or phantom scents. Had he experienced these things and simply chosen not to record them? Or was I the first one? Or maybe I was just imagining things, stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind? The thought wasn't comforting. Either the archive was haunted by whistling entities, or I was losing my grip. Neither option felt particularly good. I picked up my pen again, forcing my still unsteady hand to make an entry. 1:15 a.m. to 1:23 a.m., heard whistling, source unknown. Followed Protocol 1. Whistling ceased. It looked inadequate, clinical, failing entirely to capture the chilling reality of the experience. I tried to refocus on the brittle pages of a 1920s zoning proposal in front of me, but the eerie, wandering melody of the whistle seemed to echo just beyond the range of my hearing. Okay, here is part 3, continuing the story with the focus shifting to Row G and the lavender scent. Part 3, Row G and the scent. The whistling incident left a permanent mark on my nerves. The deep silence of the archive no longer felt empty, it felt watchful, charged with a potential I didn't want to confront. Every faint creak of the ancient building settling, every distant hum of machinery, every flicker of the unreliable fluorescent lights overhead now sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I found myself constantly scanning the shadowed aisles, listening intently for any sound out of the ordinary. The work itself, the meticulous cataloguing of forgotten history, became secondary to the act of just existing down here, staying alert. My assigned route through the stacks, dictated by the order Elias had left the boxes in, inevitably led me closer to the section designated as Row G. I knew it was coming. According to Elias's terse note and the crude map he'd drawn, this row, along with its bank of old filing cabinets, was strictly off-limits after midnight. As I finished a box of brittle faculty meeting minutes from the 1930s, I realized the next box in sequence was located right at the mouth of the forbidden aisle. I hesitated. Row G stretched away into the gloom, looking much like the others at first glance, tall metal shelves laden with grey archive boxes. But there was a subtle difference. The lighting seemed dimmer down this particular aisle, the shadows deeper, more absolute. And halfway down, breaking the monotony of the shelves, stood the bank of 5 tall, gunmetal grey filing cabinets. They were old, bearing the scars of decades, dents, scratches, patches of rust bleeding through the paint. Their brass label holders were empty, tarnished green with age. Even from the entrance of the aisle, they exuded a heavy, forbidding presence, like ancient tombs sealed against intrusion. Rule 2. The filing cabinets in row G, see map on reverse, are strictly off limits after midnight. Do not attempt to open them for any reason, especially if, you hear rattling from inside. Assume it's rats, even if it doesn't sound like rats. I decided to work on the current box without actually stepping into row G, keeping a wary distance. I pulled the box out, set it on the floor in the main corridor, and knelt beside it, trying to focus on the contents, student disciplinary records from the post-war era. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I heard the first sound. A sharp, distinct clank echoed from deep within row G, metal hitting metal. I froze, head snapping up, straining to listen. Silence descended again, thick and absolute. Had I imagined it? Then, a faint scrape, like a drawer being hesitantly pulled open an inch, followed by a series of soft, rhythmic rattle-rattle-rattle sounds. It was unmistakably coming from the filing cabinets. It wasn't loud or violent, more like testing. Like someone was gently shaking a locked drawer handle back and forth, checking if it would give. My eyes darted towards the cabinets, barely visible in the dimness halfway down the aisle. Assume it's rats, Elias had written. But this didn't sound like rats. Rats scrabble, they chew, they make frantic noises. This was slow, methodical, almost inquisitive. Like someone, or something, inside was trying the lock, or maybe, the more chilling thought, trying to signal someone outside. Trying to signal me. My palms began to sweat. Every instinct told me to investigate, to shine my light down there, to see what was causing the noise. But Elias's warning, especially if you hear rattling, screamed louder in my mind. I slowly stood up, leaving the box of disciplinary records on the floor, and backed away from the entrance to row G, keeping my eyes fixed on the distant, shadowed cabinets. The rattling continued for perhaps another minute, a soft, persistent shaking, then abruptly stopped. Just like the whistling had, it vanished without a trace, leaving only the oppressive silence and the frantic thudding of my own heart against my ribs. I made a conscious effort to stay away from that entire section, rerouting my path through other aisles, even though it meant deviating slightly from the box sequence. Row G felt like a territory marked by something unseen, and I had no intention of trespassing. Later that night, closer to 4 a.m., the fatigue was really starting to set in. I was working several rows away from row G, near the small, windowless office designated as Processing Room B, the supposed safe haven if the fake security guard ever showed up. I was carefully unfolding a fragile map from the university's early expansion phase when the scent hit me. Lavender. Rule 4. Ignore any scent of lavender, particularly if it seems strong or out of place. It is a sensory anomaly. It is not real. Do not follow it. It wasn't subtle. It bloomed in the air suddenly, intensely, a thick, almost cloying sweetness that instantly overpowered the usual musty archive smell. It was the exact scent of the dried lavender bundles my grandmother used to hang in her closets, a scent deeply tied to childhood memories, safety, and warmth. It felt incredibly, comfortingly real. I stopped working, sniffing the air cautiously. Where could it possibly be coming from? The archive was climate-controlled, the air filtered. There were no open windows, no air fresheners, none of the cleaning supplies smelled remotely like this. It simply appeared. And it seemed to be getting stronger, coalescing around my immediate vicinity. Ignore it. It is not real. Elias's words felt like a desperate plea. But how could something that smelled so vividly, so nostalgically, not be real? It tugged at memory, conjuring fleeting images of sunlight in my grandmother's kitchen, the feel of clean linen. It felt welcoming. Safe. A stark contrast to the oppressive dread that usually filled this underground space. I tried to focus on the map, tracing the lines of planned buildings that were never constructed. It's a sensory anomaly. I repeated the phrase in my head. Just ignore it. But the scent was pervasive, almost suffocating. Then, woven into the heavy fragrance, I heard something else. A whisper, soft as moth wings brushing against my ear. Indistinct at first, then coalescing, almost, into a word. A name? Leo, come here. It sounded like a woman's voice. Gentle. Familiar? For a terrifying second, it almost sounded like my mother's voice. I flinched violently, clamping my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. No, I whispered, my voice hoarse, shaking. It's not real. It's not her. It's not real. The scent and the whispers seemed to intensify for a moment, pressing in, urging me to turn, to follow, to seek the source. Come find me, Leo. But I held firm, rooted to the spot, repeating Elias's rule like a protective chant. The olfactory and auditory hallucination, it had to be a hallucination, persisted for what felt like an agonizingly long time, maybe 15 minutes. The sweet, heavy scent clung to me, the whispers occasionally flickering at the edge of my hearing, tempting, coaxing. Then, gradually, like a tide receding, it began to fade. The lavender grew fainter, the whispers dissolved back into the ambient hum, and the familiar smell of dust and decaying paper slowly reasserted itself. I leaned heavily against a metal shelf, breathing raggedly, sweat plastering my t-shirt to my back despite the cool, dry air. My hands were shaking. This job wasn't just weird, it was actively malevolent. Something down here wasn't just making noises or moving things, it was reaching out, using scent, sound, maybe even memory, to lure me in. Elias's rules weren't just quirky guidelines, they were desperate warnings crafted by someone who had clearly experienced far worse than whistling or rattling. And the thought of what horrors might have driven him to create this list made my blood run colder than the archive's concrete floor. After the chilling encounter with the phantom lavender and the whispers that weren't real, or were they, Elias's laminated card transformed in my mind from a curiosity, a potential prank, into something akin to a sacred text. Each rule felt less like a suggestion and more like a commandment etched in the stone of someone else's terror. The whistling, the rattling, the scent, these weren't random occurrences, they were scheduled events in some unseen, malevolent calendar kept by the archive itself. My approach to the job shifted fundamentally. Cataloging became secondary. My primary task now felt like navigating a minefield, with Elias's rules as the only map I had. Avoid Road G after midnight. Ignore lavender. Hide from fake security. And, the one that now loomed largest in my apprehension, deal with Shelf 13C. Shelf 13C. According to Elias's crude map, it wasn't even technically part of Row 13. While rows 13A, B, and D formed a continuous line deeper in the archive, 13C was an anomaly, an isolated unit standing starkly alone against the far back wall, near a section marked only as the damp patch. Rule 3. If any box on the isolated Shelf 13C, back wall, near damp patch appears to have moved, even slightly. Log the time and specific box. Do not touch it or attempt to move it back. Leave it for the day's shift. Do not investigate further. The specificity was unnerving. Not just a shelf, but this shelf. Not just any box, but a moved box. And the explicit instruction, do not touch it. Leave it. What was on that shelf? What happened if a box moved? And what exactly did the day shift do about it? The questions multiplied, breeding a low-level dread that hummed constantly beneath my skin. As my work progressed, box by dusty box, my designated area crept inevitably closer to the back wall, closer to 13C. I found myself inventing reasons to slow down, double-checking entries I knew were correct, taking unnecessarily long routes back to the desk for a sip of water. I was actively procrastinating the encounter, like a kid putting off a visit to the dentist. Finally, one night, or rather, early one morning, around 3:30 a.m. I ran out of buffer zones. The next box on my list was in the aisle that terminated near the dreaded shelf. There was no avoiding it. Taking a deep, fortifying breath that tasted mostly of dust, I walked slowly towards the back wall. The air definitely felt different back here. Colder, heavier, carrying a distinct chill and the unmistakable smell of damp concrete and mildew emanating from the damp patch Elias had noted, a dark stain spreading across the lower part of the wall behind the shelf. The single fluorescent tube overhead seemed dimmer here, flickering more erratically, casting jumpy shadows. And there it was. Shelf 13C. It was just a standard issue metal shelving unit, 5 levels high, painted the same drab institutional grey as all the others. But its isolation made it conspicuous. It stood alone like a forgotten monument. And there was a palpable feeling around it, a heavy, unnatural stillness, like the air itself was thick and viscous, resisting movement. The usual faint hum of the archive seemed muted here. The boxes lining its shelves were different too. Not the usual assortment of sizes and shades of grey or beige. These were all uniform, plain, dark brown cardboard, cubic in shape, roughly a foot on each side. And most disturbingly, they bore no labels. No dates, no department codes, no content descriptions. Just anonymous brown boxes, coated in a uniform layer of dust, sitting silently on their metal perch against the damp wall. With a growing sense of unease, I pulled out Elias's logbook. I flipped through the pages corresponding to this section. Shelves 13A, 13B, and 13D were all meticulously documented. Correspondence, Dean of Arts, 1961-63, budget proposals, athletics depth, 1958, alumni records, class of 1949. But shelf 13C was entirely absent. Not a single entry. It wasn't just uncatalogued, it was as if Elias had deliberately refused to acknowledge its very existence in his official record. I stood there for a long minute, just looking, flashlight beam playing over the anonymous boxes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They were perfectly aligned, equidistant, seemingly untouched. Maybe it was nothing? Maybe this was the one rule that was just paranoia? Feeling a surge of relief, I quickly scribbled in my own logbook, checked shelf 13C, 3:38 a.m., no anomalies noted. I turned and walked away, feeling foolish for my earlier anxiety. The relief was short-lived. The next night, driven by a nagging compulsion, I made checking shelf 13C part of my early routine. I approached it more confidently this time, flashlight held steady. I scanned the rows. Top shelf, fine. Second shelf, fine. Middle shelf, I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. One box. Third from the left on the middle shelf. It was wrong. It wasn't drastically out of place, not fallen or tilted. It was simply pushed forward. Maybe half an inch, perhaps slightly less, but enough to break the perfect alignment of the row. It protruded just enough to catch the light differently. As if someone had grasped it, started to pull it out, and then thought better of it. Or, the thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins, as if something inside the box had shifted, pressing against the front face, nudging it forward. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I moved the flashlight beam closer. The box was identical to its neighbor's, dark brown, unlabeled, coated in dust, except for the narrow strip on its front face, the half-inch section that now extended beyond the others. That strip was clean, devoid of dust. Shiny, almost, in the flashlight beam. Recent movement. Undeniable. Log it, but do not touch it. Do not attempt to move it back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted, more than anything, to just nudge it back into place. The slight asymmetry screamed at me, a visible flaw in the order, a sign that something was fundamentally wrong. More than that, the urge to know what was inside was almost overwhelming. What secrets did these anonymous boxes hold? What was important enough, or dangerous enough, to warrant these bizarre precautions? Was it connected to the whistling entity? The thing rattling the cabinets? The lavender ghost? But Elias's warning echoed, sharp and clear. Do not touch it. Leave it for the day's shift. What power did these boxes hold? What happened to the archivist in 1979 who had apparently pushed one back, only for it to disappear later? With tremendous effort, I forced myself to lower my hand, turning instead to my logbook. My fingers felt clumsy, numb. Shelf 13C, 2:47 a.m., Box 3B, middle shelf, third from left, moved approximate 0.5 inches forward. Clean strip on front indicates recent movement. Signed, dated. Protocol followed. I snapped the logbook shut and backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the shelf, off that one slightly protruding box. As I turned to leave the aisle, I felt it again, stronger this time, an intense, focused pressure on my back, like unseen eyes were drilling into me, emanating directly from shelf 13C. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight beam across the shelf. Nothing. Just the silent metal rack, the rows of anonymous brown boxes, and the one that sat slightly askew, a silent, dusty sentinel guarding an unknown secret. I practically ran back towards my desk, the feeling of being intensely watched lingering long after shelf 13C was lost in the rows behind me. For the rest of that night, the back wall of the archive felt like a gaping maw, and I couldn't shake the image of that slightly moved box. The moved box on shelf 13C became a new focal point for my anxiety. Every night, checking it was the first thing I did after tentatively confirming the archive was normal. And every night, it remained exactly as I'd last seen it, protruding by that slight, deliberate half-inch, the clean strip mocking the surrounding dust. It was a constant, silent reminder that something down here was active, aware, and capable of interacting with the physical environment, even if only in subtle ways. This knowledge frayed my nerves raw. I started bringing extra coffee, needing the caffeine to stay hyper-alert, but it only amplified my jumpiness. Adherence to Elias's rules became my shield, my ritual against the encroaching dread. I timed my movements, avoided row G like it radiated poison after midnight, mentally braced myself for phantom lavender that thankfully hadn't returned, and kept the stairwell door in my peripheral vision during the designated whistling hours, which also hadn't repeated, adding another layer of unsettling unpredictability. Several nights passed in this state of heightened alert but relative quiet. I almost dared to hope that maybe the activity occurred in phases, that perhaps things would settle down. That hope shattered around 1:45 a.m. on what had been an otherwise uneventful Tuesday shift. I was immersed in a box of financial ledgers from the university's earliest days, the spidery ink detailing expenditures on chalk and coal. My desk lamp cast a focus beam on the brittle pages. Suddenly, the main fluorescent lights directly overhead didn't just flicker, they went out, came back on, went out again, then stayed on. On off on. Then, a pause of about 2 seconds, filled only by the omnipresent hum. And then the cycle repeated. On off on. Pause. On off on. Pause. My heart leaped into my throat. The rhythmic pattern was unmistakable. Rule 5. If the lights flicker rhythmically, pattern, on off on, pause, repeat, immediately turn off your desk lamp and sit perfectly still in the dark. Do not move or make any sound, including breathing loudly, until they return to normal steady illumination. Allow at least 1 full minute of steady light before moving. Without a second thought, my hand shot out and slammed the switch on my gooseneck lamp. Instantly, my small circle of warm light vanished, plunging my desk area into a much deeper gloom. The only illumination now came from the more distant fluorescent tubes down the aisles, and even those were participating in the unnerving rhythmic flashing, casting the entire archive into a strobing, disorienting pattern of light and shadow. The towering shelves seemed to lurch and sway in the pulsating darkness. Sit perfectly still. Do not make any sound. I froze mid-breath, hunched over the desk. The silence in the archive deepened, intensified by the rhythmic click-click of the lights cutting in and out, followed by the heavy, waiting silence of the pause. It felt like the building itself had developed a monstrous, mechanical heartbeat. Click-click. Pause. Click-click. Pause. The near darkness was terrifying. Shadows writhed and stretched, taking on menacing shapes in my peripheral vision. Was that a figure standing at the end of the aisle? No, just the silhouette of a tall shelf momentarily sharpened by the flickering light. Was that movement near row G? Impossible to tell, the shadows there were too deep, too absolute. My eyes strained, desperately trying to pierce the gloom, but the strobing effect made it impossible to focus, creating phantom movements where there were none. I forced myself to regulate my breathing, making it shallow, silent, terrified that even the sound of air entering my lungs might betray my presence to whatever unseen thing commanded the lights. My muscles screamed in protest from the rigid stillness. A cramp started in my leg, and I fought against the urge to shift, to alleviate it. Sweat beaded on my forehead, cold in the climate-controlled air. The rhythmic clicking felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. Click-click. Pause. Click-click. Pause. What was this? It didn't feel like a power surge. It felt deliberate. Controlled. Was it a signal, meant for something else lurking down here? A warning directed at me? Or was it something actively searching, using the flashes of light like a gruesome sonar, trying to pinpoint my location in the darkness? The possibility made my skin crawl with a primal fear. The air felt thick, charged, vibrating with unseen energy. I felt like a mouse hiding from an owl, utterly vulnerable, exposed even in the shadows. Then, cutting through the rhythmic clicking, I heard another sound. Faint, but distinct in the otherwise profound silence during one of the pauses. A scrape. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy, possibly metal, being pulled across the concrete floor. It seemed to come from the direction of row G, or perhaps the aisle just beyond it. My head instinctively turned towards the sound, but I saw nothing but deeper darkness. The scraping lasted only a second, then silence again. Was it related to the filing cabinets? Or was it something else, moving under the cover of the strobing darkness? The rhythmic flickering continued relentlessly. I risked a glance at the luminous dial of my cheap watch, 1:56 a.m. It felt like I'd been frozen here for an hour, but only about 11 minutes had passed. Each cycle felt longer than the last. The pause, the heavy silence between the bursts of light, became the worst part, a moment of pure, agonizing anticipation. Click, click. Pause. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear the disorienting strobe effect any longer, focusing entirely on Elias's rule. Sit perfectly still. Do not make any sound. I clung to the words, the only anchor in this terrifying, flickering void. Suddenly, the pattern broke. The rhythmic clicking stopped. The lights above remained off. A long, breathless moment stretched, 1 second, 2, 3, the darkness absolute, the silence complete. Then, with a hesitant, almost reluctant buzz, the fluorescent tubes flickered back on, one by one, returning to their usual, unsteady but constant, illumination. The oppressive, charged feeling in the air began to dissipate, replaced slowly by the familiar, monotonous hum of the dehumidifier and ventilation systems. I didn't move. My muscles screamed, but I stayed frozen, remembering the final part of the rule, allow at least 1 full minute of steady light before moving. I counted the seconds in my head, watching the lights, watching the shadows, listening intently. 60 seconds passed. The lights held steady. The archive remained silent, except for its usual mechanical noises. Slowly, shakily, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My chest ached. Cautiously, I reached out a trembling hand and switched my desk lamp back on. The familiar, contained pool of light felt incredibly comforting, a small island of normalcy in the vast, unnerving space. I scanned the visible aisles again. Everything appeared unchanged. No sign of disturbance, no clue as to what had caused the lights to behave so strangely, or what had made that scraping sound in the darkness. Slumping back in my chair, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, the adrenaline leaving a residue of nausea and trembling. Whatever that episode was, it was over. But the certainty that I was not alone down here, that the archive itself was a participant in these events, perhaps even orchestrating them, settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just a place containing strange things, it felt like the place itself was strange, sentient, and potentially hostile. And it knew I was here, watching me follow its inscrutable rules under its flickering, indifferent lights. My gaze drifted nervously towards the entrance of row G, wondering again what secrets its silent filing cabinets held. The rhythmic lights incident irrevocably shifted the atmosphere of the sub-basement archive. Before, the strangeness felt almost passive, eerie sounds, misplaced objects, phantom scents. Now, it felt actively hostile, like I had provoked something by merely existing in its space. The paranoia became a constant hum beneath my skin. I found myself meticulously checking the locks on the stairwell and elevator doors, even though the elevator was supposedly off-limits, jumping at the flutter of paper disturbed by the ventilation, seeing fleeting movement in the deepest shadows between the shelves. Sleep, even during the daylight hours away from this place, became a luxury, often interrupted by fragmented nightmares of flickering lights and scraping sounds. The archive wasn't just a workplace, It felt like a predator's territory I trespassed in nightly. One particularly tense Thursday night, the feeling of being watched was almost suffocating. I'd spent hours forcing myself to focus on cataloging microfiche records, the tiny projected text blurring before my tired eyes. It was nearing the end of my shift, almost 5 a.m. This was always the hardest part, fatigue dulling my senses, the relief of imminent escape making me paradoxically more vulnerable. I was working near the service elevator shaft, trying to ignore the way the absolute darkness beyond its closed metal doors seemed to press outward, feeling colder than the surrounding air. Suddenly, shattering the monotonous hum, came the distinct ding of the elevator arriving, followed by the low rumble of its machinery settling into place. On my level. My head snapped up, heart instantly lodging itself somewhere near my Adam's apple. The elevator wasn't supposed to work at night. It was a known quirk, reinforced by Elias's very first rule about avoiding it during the whistling. It had never moved in the weeks I'd been here. With a smooth, almost silent hiss, the heavy metal doors slid open. Standing inside, bathed in the elevator's weak internal light, was a man. He wore the standard navy blue Garrison University security uniform, complete with a badge clipped to his shirt pocket and a radio crackling softly at his hip. He looked perhaps mid-40s, his face lined with fatigue, hair slightly mussed, eyes weary but alert. He stepped out onto the concrete floor, his boots making soft sounds. "Evening," he said, his voice roughened, echoing slightly in the vast quiet. He squinted at me in the relatively dim archive light. "Just doing a late check. Everything all right down here?" My mind flashed instantly to the laminated card, Rule 6 blazing like a warning flare: security does not patrol the sub-basement at night. Dr. Albright is misinformed or mistaken. If you see or hear anyone identifying themselves as security after 10 p.m., it is not security. Lock yourself in the small office, processing room B, immediately using the internal deadbolt. Do not respond to them. Do not come out until 6 a.m. sharp, regardless of what you hear. This wasn't security. No matter how normal he looked, no matter how plausible his presence seemed, Elias's rule was absolute. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my fatigue. Yeah, I stammered, forcing my voice to sound casual, even as I instinctively started backing away, edging towards the short corridor just 20 feet away that led to processing room B. Everything's fine. Just quiet. Didn't expect anyone down here. He frowned slightly, his gaze sharpening as he took a step further into the archive, away from the elevator. Yeah, well, Albright mentioned the last student assistant, Elias, was it? Reported some lights flickering erratically down here a while back. Maintenance couldn't find anything topside, so they asked us to check the main breaker panels when we had a chance. Thought I'd take a look while things were quiet. You seen anything unusual with the lights? His explanation was almost too perfect. It addressed a known issue, mentioned Elias, sounded like standard procedure. But his approach felt wrong. His eyes, despite looking tired, seemed intensely focused on me, tracking my slight backward movement. No, nothing like that, I lied, my voice tight. My hand reached behind me, brushing the cold concrete wall, searching blindly for the opening to the corridor. Lights have been normal. Just the usual flicker now and then. "Hey," he said, stopping about 10 feet away now. He seemed to deliberate for a second, then unclipped his radio, holding it near his mouth but keeping his eyes locked on me. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, checking sub-basement archive electrical room access. All clear on the main floor so far." He paused, head tilted as if listening to a reply that never came through the speaker. "Roger that." "Proceeding." He clipped the radio back onto his belt, the facade perfectly maintained. "You sure you haven't seen anything? Heard anything? This place gives me the creeps even during the day." My fingers finally found the edge of the corridor opening. Relief warred with terror. "Positive," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just me and the dusty boxes." He took another deliberate step closer, closing the distance. "Mind if I check that little office back there first?" He gestured with his chin towards processing room B, the very room I needed to reach. "Pretty sure the main junction box for this level is in there." Pure panic flared in my chest. He was blocking my escape. "It's, locked," I blurted, the lie clumsy. "Dr. Albright keeps it locked at night." Something about sensitive materials being processed. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something cold passed behind his weary expression. "That's funny," he said, his voice losing some of its casualness. "She gave me a master key this afternoon. Said I might need it." He started reaching slowly into his bulky uniform pocket. That was the breaking point. I didn't wait to see if he actually had a key. I spun around and bolted down the short corridor towards room B. I heard him curse behind me, followed by heavy, rapid footsteps. I reached the metal door of room B, yanked it open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. My trembling fingers scrabbled desperately for the deadbolt knob on the inside. It felt stiff, unused. "Come on, come on." The deadbolt finally slid heavily into place with a satisfying thunk just as something immensely heavy slammed against the outside of the door. Bang! The thick metal door shuddered violently, bowing inward slightly under the impact. "Leo? What the hell?" "Open the door," the security guard's voice called. But it was different now. Flat. Hard. Devoid of the earlier tired warmth. Utterly demanding. Bang! Bang! Harder this time. The door vibrated against my back as I pressed against it. The metal hinges groaned in protest. "Leo! Procedure dictates you cooperate with university security personnel. Open this door. Now!" I scrambled away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall of the tiny, windowless office. It was maybe 8 feet square, crammed with a metal desk, a rolling chair, and floor-to-ceiling shelves stacked with archival supplies, acid-free folders, pH testing pens, document weights. There was no other exit. No windows. Just this one metal door. The pounding continued, relentless, rhythmic, brutal. Bang! 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 It didn't sound like fists anymore. It sounded like he was using a battering ram, or maybe that sledgehammer I'd imagined, though I knew he hadn't been carrying one. How could mere human strength inflict such force? Then, abruptly, the pounding stopped. My ears rang in the sudden silence. But it was replaced, a moment later, by a sound far more unnerving. A slow, deliberate scraping. Metal on metal. Scree, scrape, scree. Like long, sharp claws being dragged across the outside surface of the door, testing its strength, searching for purchase. I slid down the cold concrete wall until I was huddled on the floor, curling into a tight ball, hands clamped tight over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. This wasn't a security guard. It was something else. Something pretending. something strong and malevolent. And it knew my name. The scraping continued for minutes, tracing unseen, sinister patterns on the other side of the door, occasionally punctuated by another violent slam that made the whole frame rattle. Then, silence again. A heavy, waiting silence. Followed, chillingly, by a low, guttural chuckle, distorted and inhuman, seeming to vibrate right through the metal. "Clever boy," the voice rasped, sounding like rocks grinding together, barely recognizable as the guards anymore. "Following the rules your little friend Elias left for you." Another dry chuckle. "But rules can be broken, Leo. Doors can certainly be opened. We have plenty of time." A pause, filled only by my own ragged breathing. "We have until 6 a.m. Silence descended once more, absolute and terrifying. I stayed curled on the cold floor, shaking uncontrollably, every nerve screaming. I risked a glance at my watch, 5:18 a.m. 42 minutes. 42 minutes until sunrise, until the supposed safety of 6 a.m. 42 minutes locked in a tiny, steel-doored box, with something monstrous and inhuman waiting patiently, or perhaps impatiently, just on the other side. The longest 42 minutes of my life were just beginning. The silence outside the heavy metal door of Processing Room B stretched, taut and agonizing. It was far worse than the earlier pounding or scraping. My mind filled the void, conjuring images of the fake security guard, or whatever it truly was, just standing there, listening, waiting with inhuman patience. Was it still in the guard's form? Had it shifted into something else, something like the spindly horror glimpsed in the logbook photo? Was it trying to find another way in, probing the vents, the ceiling? The uncertainty was a separate kind of torture. Time seemed to warp in the tiny, windowless office. Seconds dragged like minutes, minutes felt like hours. I stayed huddled on the cold floor, back pressed against the concrete wall furthest from the door, knees drawn to my chest, making myself as small as possible. My ears strained, catching every tiny sound, the hum of the lights that hadn't flickered this time, the whisper of air through the ventilation grate near the ceiling, the frantic thumping of my own heart. Eventually, the sheer terror began to give way, just slightly, to a desperate need for distraction, for something to focus on besides the silent, malevolent presence I felt lurking just inches away on the other side of the steel door. My eye scanned the cramped space again. Shelves crammed with archival supplies, boxes of acid-free folders, rolls of mylar, pH testing pens, book weights, spare light bulbs, cleaning fluids in ominous-looking plastic bottles. Nothing that offered any real comfort or defense, save perhaps for the satisfying heft of a heavy-duty industrial stapler lying on the metal desk. It wasn't much, but I crawled over and retrieved it, clutching it like a talisman. My gaze then fell upon a stack of old logbooks piled haphazardly on the bottom shelf under the desk, thicker and far more worn than the one Elias had been using. They looked ancient, their plain cardboard covers stained and softened with age, dates handwritten on the spines in faded black marker. Curiosity, or maybe just the desperate need to anchor myself in some kind of understandable reality, even someone else's past terror, made me reach for the topmost one. The spine read 1978 to 1979. Carefully, I opened the brittle cover. The pages were yellowed, filled with handwriting distinctly different from Elias's precise script. This was looser, more sprawling, occasionally devolving into frantic scribbles. The entries began mundanely enough, detailing the cataloguing of university records, similar to my own tasks. But as the dates progressed, notes of unease, then outright fear, began to creep in, interspersed with the routine entries. My eye scanned, picking out familiar horrors. October 12, 1978, heard the whistling again tonight. louder this time, seemed to follow me down aisle 4. Stayed by the stairs until it stopped. Jittery all shift. November 5, 1978, filing cabinets in row G rattled almost constantly between midnight and 2 a.m. Definitely not rats. Felt like something wanted out. Checked the locks, still secure. Made sure the row is clearly marked off limits on night procedures. December 1st, 1978, God, the lavender smell. Came out of nowhere, thick as fog. Thought I heard Martha, her name, circled, then scribbled through, calling my name, clear as day. Didn't respond. Remember Rule 4. A shaky for was indeed circled next to the entry. Faded after 10 minutes. Shook me bad. January 20th, 1979, shelf 13C. That damn box. Third one, middle shelf. Moved again, pushed forward maybe an inch. Couldn't stand it. Pushed it back. Felt cold to the touch. Wrong. Shouldn't have touched it. Logged it anyway. My breath caught. This archivist, whoever he was, he had touched the box. He broke Elias's cardinal rule. What happened then? I flipped rapidly through the subsequent pages, my fingers clumsy with dread, scanning the increasingly erratic entries. February 14th, 1979, lights did that damn rhythm thing again. On off on, sat in the dark like the rule says. Heard scraping near G, then closer, right outside the room B door this time. Didn't try the handle. Just scraping. March 2nd, 1979, saw him tonight. Security uniform. Badge said Henderson. Knew it was wrong, felt it. Made it to room B just in time. He pounded on the door. How did he know my name, Richard? Stayed locked in until 6 a.m. sharp. Didn't hear him leave. March 29th, 1979, haven't gone near 13C for weeks. Couldn't avoid it tonight. Force myself. Box 3B, it's gone. Not moved, gone. Just an empty space on the shelf. Dust disturbed. Where did it go? The entries became dramatically sparser after that date. Days, then weeks, were skipped. The handwriting deteriorated into almost illegible scrawls. April 10th, 1979, it's in the walls now. I hear it moving. Scratching inside the concrete. Not rats. Too big. April 15th, 1979, lavender again. Martha's voice. So clear this time. Right behind me. Calling me. Begging me to turn around. Didn't. April 18th, 1979, you can't sleep, even at home. Keep thinking about the box. Where did it go? Did it take it? Did touching it let something out? The final entry was dated April 21st, 1979. It wasn't even an entry, just 2 words, huge, scrawled frantically, violently, across the entire page, tearing through the paper in places. It's open. My blood turned to ice water. Open? What was open? The box? The filing cabinets? The archive itself? What had happened to this man, Richard? The logbook ended there. No more entries. Suddenly, a sound jolted me back to the terrifying present. A faint, hesitant scratching on the outside of the office door. Not the violent pounding from before, but a light, persistent scritch, 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 like dry fingernails, or perhaps insect legs, tracing delicate lines on the cold steel. My breath hitched. It was back. Or maybe it had never left, just waited, patiently, silently. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Lower down now, near the bottom edge of the door. I scrambled backwards on the floor, pressing myself tight against the shelves behind me, eyes wide, fixed on the door. My watch face glowed faintly, 5:58 a.m. 2 minutes. Just 2 more minutes until the supposed safety of 6 a.m. Could I make it? The scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening with an intensity that made my ears ache. Then, a soft, wet, almost intimate thump against the very bottom of the door, immediately followed by a low, dragging, sliding sound. Something was being pushed underneath the narrow gap. A piece of paper, folded and ancient-looking, slid into view on the dusty concrete floor inside the office. Against every rational survival instinct, compelled by a morbid, terrifying curiosity I couldn't deny, I reached out a trembling hand for it. My fingers brushed the cool, brittle paper. Carefully, I unfolded it. It was a photograph, even older and more faded than the paper suggested, creased from being folded for so long. It showed the archive, instantly recognizable despite the photo's age and poor quality. Standing near the center, smiling a little awkwardly, somewhat stiffly, at the camera, was a young man with dark, slicked-back hair and glasses, Richard, the archivist from the logbook, I presumed. Standing close beside him, her hand linked gently through his arm, was a pleasant-looking woman with kind eyes and a simple dress. Martha, perhaps? His wife? They looked happy, hopeful, utterly normal. But it wasn't the couple that made me gasp, a strangled sound tearing from my throat, and dropped the photograph as if it had burned me. It was what stood behind them, partially obscured by the looming shadow of what had to be shelf 13C in the background. A figure. Tall, impossibly thin, sketched in shades of grey and black, blending almost perfectly with the deep shadows between the shelves, only partially visible. What I could see wasn't human. Long, spindly, stick-like limbs that seemed to bend at far too many unnatural angles. A head that was too large for its body, tilted curiously, with gaping, empty black sockets where eyes should be, somehow seeming to stare directly at the camera. And its hands, horrifyingly long, multi-jointed fingers ending in wickedly sharp claws, one of which rested, almost possessively, on Richard the archivist's shoulder. It wasn't something superimposed, it looked undeniably part of the scene, a silent, unseen participant lurking just behind the oblivious, smiling couple. Underneath the photograph, scrawled in the same shaky, deteriorating hand as Richard's final log entries, was a single, chilling line. It was always here. My watch beeped, startlingly loud in the tense silence. 6 a.m. The scratching on the door started again, instantly, no longer hesitant but frantic, furious, claws digging, tearing, gouging at the metal with terrifying speed. And a voice, not the guards, not the chorus, but Richard's voice, ragged with decades of unimaginable fear, whispered hoarsely from the other side, "Let me in. It's open now. Martha? Let me in. Let me in. Leo, it's open. You have to let me in." The voice, a horrifying blend of Richard the archivist's desperate plea and something older, colder, scraped against the metal door, mimicking the frantic scritch-scritch of unseen claws. It was 6 a.m. My shift was officially over. Rule 6 stated clearly, do not come out until 6 a.m. sharp, regardless of what you hear. Technically, the time had come. I could leave. But the sheer violence directed at the door, the palpable malevolence radiating from the other side, screamed that leaving wasn't an option. Whatever was out there wasn't punching a clock. It's open. Richard's final, frantic words hammered in my brain. What had he opened? By touching the box? By breaking some unseen rule? And did opening this door, processing room BS door, now constitute opening that same metaphysical it? The thought was paralyzing. I scrambled back from the door, eyes darting between the groaning deadbolt and the photograph I dropped on the floor, the smiling couple, Richard and Martha, forever oblivious to the spindly nightmare lurking just behind them. It was always here. It hadn't gotten in, it had been let out. Maybe by Richard himself. The pounding intensified again, no longer just scratching, but brutal, rhythmic slams that made the entire small office vibrate. Dust sifted down from the ceiling tiles. A crack appeared near the door handle, thin as a hair at first, then visibly widening with each impact. Whatever was out there wasn't just a creature anymore, the sheer force felt like multiple entities, or something impossibly strong. It felt like the archive itself, roused and furious, was trying to break down the door and reclaim something, or someone. My mind raced frantically through Elias's rules, searching for a loophole, an escape clause, anything beyond passive avoidance. Whistling? Go to the stairs. Rattling? Ignore. Lavender? Ignore. Flickering lights? Hide. Fake security? Hide. The rules were entirely defensive, designed for enduring, not escaping, direct assault. What happened when avoidance failed? What happened when hiding was no longer enough? Elias hadn't left a rule for this. I glanced at the heavy metal desk crammed against one wall. It was old, probably from the 50s, solid steel. An idea sparked, born of sheer desperation, probably monumentally stupid, but better than waiting passively to be devoured. If I couldn't keep it out indefinitely, maybe I could create a second barrier. Block its entrance after opening the main door, buying myself, what? Time to think? Time to find another way out? Okay. Okay, I hear you. I'm opening it. Just stand back. I yelled towards the door, trying to inject a note of panicked compliance into my voice over the deafening cacophony of the assault. Instantly, the pounding stopped. The sudden silence was jarring, broken only by a low, wet, guttural breathing sound, seeming to ooze through the metal, right outside the door. It was waiting. Taking a ragged breath, steeling myself against the wave of nausea rising in my throat, I gripped the deadbolt knob. My plan, flimsy as it was, formed rapidly: twist the lock, yank the door open just a crack, enough to see, enough to confirm what I was facing, then immediately slam it shut again while simultaneously trying to shove the heavy metal desk against it. It was a terrible plan. I twisted the deadbolt. The click echoed like a gunshot in the tense silence. Bracing myself, I pulled the heavy door inward, fast, maybe 6 inches. For one horrifying, crystallized split second, I saw it. It wasn't the security guard's form. It wasn't the spindly, shadowy creature from Richard's photograph, not exactly. It was worse, because it was both and neither, and more. A writhing mass of shifting shadows and impossibly pale, multi-jointed limbs filled the doorway, crouched low, seeming to unfold itself from the corridor beyond. Too many joints bending the wrong way, too many glistening black eyes reflecting the single harsh bulb of the office light. Its overall shape was fluid, indistinct, nightmarish, like glimpsing something vast and terrible through murky water. And the smell that hit me, overpowering the archive's dust, wasn't lavender, but deep decay, cold, damp earth, and something indescribably ancient and wrong. It lunged the microsecond the door cracked open, a blur of pale limbs and grasping claws surging towards the gap. There was no time to shove the desk. No time for a second barrier. My only instinct was raw survival. With strength I didn't know I possessed, I slammed the heavy steel door shut again, throwing my entire body weight against it. I fumbled frantically for the deadbolt, twisting it fractions of a second before the monstrous mass hit the door from the outside with terrifying, solid force. Whump! The door buckled outwards violently, hinges screaming in protest, the steel groaning around the deadbolt housing. It held, but barely. Shards of something, chitin? Bone? Flew from the impact site outside. It hadn't worked. The desk plan was useless. It was too fast, too strong. The door wouldn't hold against another assault like that. I stumbled backwards, heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt, looking widely around the small, imprisoning office. The shelves. The cleaning supplies. The old logbook scattered on the floor. Richard's logbook. I lunged for the 1979 logbook, snatching it up, flipping frantically, desperately, to that final, cryptic page. It's open. What did it mean? What was open? My eye scanned Richard's cramped, terrified script, searching for a clue I'd missed. Nothing. Just the two stark words. My gaze swept the tiny office again. Shelves lined 3 walls, packed with useless supplies. The 4th wall, the one I was now backed against again, was bare, stained concrete, except for that almost invisible seam I'd noticed earlier near the floor, running vertically behind where the desk usually sat. A patched section? A covered utility access? The pounding on the door resumed, heavier now, more deliberate, seeking to exploit the damage from the first impact. Wham! Crunch! A visible crack spiderwebbed across the metal near the strained deadbolt. Dropping the logbook again, I scrambled on hands and knees to the faint seam in the concrete wall, running my trembling fingers along it. It felt slightly raised, uneven, definitely newer concrete patching over something older. I pushed against it frantically. Solid. I kicked it hard, near the floor where the seam was widest. A distinctly hollow thump echoed back. There was something behind it. Grabbing the heavy-duty stapler from where I'd dropped it, I started hammering the metal corner of it against the edge of the seam, chipping away flakes of concrete and plaster, trying desperately to get some kind of leverage, some kind of opening. Crack! The sound came not from the wall, but from the office door. It split vertically near the deadbolt housing. A pale, impossibly long, multi-jointed finger, greyish-white and tipped with a black, needle-sharp claw, poked through the new opening, wriggling obscenely in the air. Terror gave me strength. I hammered harder, faster at the panel seam. A larger chunk of crumbling plaster fell away, revealing rusted, pitted metal beneath. An old, recessed handle, almost completely corroded. I jammed my fingers into it, ignoring the bite of rust, and pulled with everything I had. With a tortured groan of long-frozen metal, a small, incredibly heavy door, set deep into the concrete wall and previously hidden by the plaster patch, swung stiffly inward, revealing a dark, narrow space beyond. It looked like an old service tunnel or forgotten maintenance crawl space, barely tall enough to crouch in, disappearing into pitch blackness. The office door exploded inwards off its hinges. I didn't hesitate. Didn't look back. I threw myself headfirst into the dark, musty opening, scrambling forward, pulling the heavy, rusted metal panel shut behind me just as the creature, or creatures, surged into the office space I had just vacated. There was no lock on this side, just the rough concrete frame, but maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't immediately figure out how to open it. Maybe it would buy me seconds. I landed hard on a packed dirt floor in absolute, suffocating darkness. The air was cold, damp, thick with the smell of old earth and pervasive mildew. Behind me, through the thin gap around the ill-fitting metal panel, I heard the creature. It sounded like multiple creatures now, a cacophony of wet clicks and enraged screeches, burst fully into the office. The sounds of shelves being torn apart, supplies scattering, metal screeching, followed immediately. Frantically, I scrambled backwards on all fours, deeper into the suffocating blackness of the tunnel, crab walking away from the flimsy metal panel, my only pathetic protection. The sounds of destruction in the office abruptly stopped. Then, chillingly, a horrifyingly soft, almost gentle tap-tap-tap started on the inside face of the metal panel, just inches from where I crouched in the dark. It knew where I was. Tap! 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 The sound was soft, almost unnervingly gentle against the inside of the rusted metal panel separating me from the office. It wasn't the sound of brute force, but of insidious curiosity. Then came the scraping. Not the frantic, tearing claws from before, but a slower, more deliberate scree, like it was testing the texture of the metal, running a sharp point along its surface, searching for a seam, a weakness. I remained frozen, huddled perhaps 20 feet back in the suffocating darkness of the crawl space. My phone's flashlight was off. Any light felt like a beacon in this absolute blackness. I held my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my own blood. The tunnel itself seemed to press in, the air thick with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else, a faint, coppery tang, like old, dried blood. It stretched forward into an impenetrable void. The scraping on the panel stopped. A heavy, profound silence fell, amplifying the ringing in my ears. Had it given up? Decided I wasn't worth the effort? Or was it simply waiting, listening for any sign of my presence? The uncertainty was agonizing. My mind flashed back to Richard the archivist's frantic logbook entry. It's in the walls. This tunnel, was this how it moved through the archive unseen? Was I currently trapped inside its hidden pathways? The thought sent a fresh wave of clammy fear washing over me. Then, a new sound began, confirming my dread. Faint at first, seeming to echo from far ahead, deeper within the tunnel's blackness, but growing steadily, chillingly closer. Whistling. The same tuneless, meandering, high-pitched whistle I'd heard on my very first night. It wasn't coming from the office behind me anymore. It was coming from whatever lay ahead of me, in the unexplored depths of this hidden passage. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just behind the panel, it was in the tunnel with me. Or rather, something was. I was caught between them, trapped in the dark heart of the archive's hidden veins. As if summoned by the whistle, the scraping on the panel behind me resumed, no longer exploratory but forceful, violent. Metal screeched loudly against metal as something sharp tried to pry at the edges where the panel met the concrete. It was trying to get in. Now. The whistling ahead abruptly grew louder, much closer. It was accompanied now by a distinct, soft, rhythmic shuffling sound, like cardboard being dragged across the dirt floor. Whatever was making the whistling sound was almost upon me. Trapped. No way forward, no way back. Utter blackness ahead, a monstrous entity breaking through behind. Panic, raw and blinding, threatened to overwhelm me. My breath came in ragged gasps. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying desperately to think, to find some anchor in the swirling terror. Elias's rules. Richard's notes. It was always here. It's open. Rule 0, nothing leaves the ice that was not there before. Ice? The word snagged in my frantic thoughts. There was no ice down here. Just dirt, rock, damp concrete. Why ice? Unless ice wasn't literal. Unless it meant containment. A state of being frozen, held, separated? The panel behind me groaned loudly, visibly bending inward at the edge under immense pressure. Darkness fractured as pale, impossibly long, spindly fingers probed the newly created opening, wriggling like albino worms. The whistling ahead stopped dead. The shuffling sound ceased. It was here, right in front of me, just beyond the range of my sight in the oppressive dark. I could feel its presence, a cold spot in the already chilly air. Think, Leo, think. What wasn't there before? What left the vice? The archive contents. No, they belonged here. The building itself? Always been here. Me? Maybe, but that didn't feel right. The boxes on shelf 13C. The plain, unlabeled brown boxes. The one that moved. The one that disappeared after Richard touched it. It's open. Richard's last words. The box. The box must have been opened, its contents released. Or maybe the box itself was the thing that wasn't supposed to leave. The panel behind me ripped open with a final, agonized screech of tearing metal. The shifting, multi-limbed, multi-eyed mass surged into the tunnel entrance, unfolding itself in the cramped space, far larger than the security guard it had mimicked. Simultaneously, the shuffling thing right in front of me finally came into view as my eyes adjusted slightly to the profound lack of light. It wasn't the source of the whistling. It wasn't a creature at all. It was the box. One of the plain, dark brown, unlabeled boxes from shelf 13C, just sitting there incongruously on the dirt floor of the tunnel, about 10 feet in front of me. As the creature behind me scrambled closer, filling the tunnel with its grotesque bulk and the stench of decay, the box vibrated. A low, resonant hum filled the narrow space, felt more than heard. The lid trembled, rattling against the cardboard sides. Do not touch it. Elias's rule, seared into my memory. Richard pushed it back, interfered, and later the box was gone, and it's open. What if Rule 0 wasn't a warning to me about taking things out? What if it was a fundamental rule for them, for whatever was down here? Nothing leaves its containment. What if the box was the ice, the prison? And Richard, by touching it, by moving it back, had somehow broken the seal, violated the rule, leading eventually to its open? The creature behind me let out a triumphant, gurgling hiss, sensing me cornered, trapped between it and the humming box. The box in front of me hummed louder, the lid visibly starting to lift, seemingly by itself. A faint, cold light began to leak from beneath it. I had maybe a second, less, to make a choice. Break Elias's rule about not touching anything from 13C, or face the monstrous entity surging towards me. Nothing leaves the ice that was not there before. It wasn't a warning to me. It felt like a law of this place. A rule for them. Whatever was meant to be in that box, it wasn't supposed to be out. Maybe the archive, maybe reality itself, needed it back. I didn't lunge towards the box to open it further or investigate. Instead, I lunged past it, scrambling desperately deeper into the pitch-black tunnel. As I scrambled by on hands and knees, I slammed my right foot backwards with all the force I could muster, kicking the humming, vibrating box, sending it tumbling end over end towards the monstrous creature surging into the tunnel from the office. The box, surprisingly heavy, hit the creature's amorphous, shifting form with a dull, wet thud. The effect was instantaneous, violating, and utterly catastrophic. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound of pure, tearing agony that reverberated deafeningly through the narrow tunnel, far worse than any sound it had made before. Its form instantly destabilized, flickering violently like bad reception. Where the brown box made contact, the creature's shadowy, multi-limbed mass seemed to instantly freeze, turning brittle, crystalline, a rapidly forming lattice of frost spreading outwards from the point of impact. The box itself flared, not with heat, but with an intense, impossibly cold, blue light, the exact same eerie, pulsing blue as the corrupted ID badge the false Dr. Emerson had offered me. The low hum intensified into a deafening, subsonic roar that vibrated through my bones. The frost, the blue crystallization, spread with unnatural speed from the point of contact, encasing the thrashing creature. It writhed, limbs cracking audibly like breaking icicles, its multiple eyes shattering like dark glass. It tried to pull away, to recoil, but the simple brown box seemed fused to it now, pouring out that freezing, destructive blue energy, consuming it. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. The blinding blue light faded. The deafening roar stopped. Where the monstrous creature had filled the tunnel entrance just moments before, there was now only dust. A pile of fine, grey, almost impalpable dust, rapidly dissipating in the still, cold air, leaving no trace. And the box. It sat innocuously on the dirt floor where the creature had fallen, lid closed, silent, looking for all the world like just another dusty, forgotten archive box. I stared, panting, drenched in cold sweat, chest heaving. Rule 0. Maybe it meant nothing gets put back once it's left its designated containment. Or maybe the box itself enforced the rule, reclaiming or neutralizing whatever escaped. I didn't know. At that moment, I didn't care. The immediate threat was gone. Scrambling backwards on the rough dirt, ignoring the scrapes to my hands, I moved towards the ripped-open panel, back towards the dim light filtering in from the archive office, desperate for the familiar, sterile, relatively sane environment. I burst back into the wrecked office, slamming the heavy, rusted service tunnel door shut behind me. It barely fit in its warped frame now. I frantically wedged the broken office chair against it, knowing deep down it wouldn't hold anything truly determined back for long, but needing the fragile illusion of safety. The archive beyond the ruined office door was silent. Eerily silent. But through the high, grimy clear-story windows near the ceiling, far above the sub-basement levels, faint grey light was beginning to stream in. Morning was coming. I checked my watch, the luminous dial somehow still intact. 6:45 a.m. My shift was long, long over. I gathered my few belongings, my backpack, Elias's logbook, Richard's logbook, the chilling photograph of the couple and their lurking shadow. I glanced back one last time at the wedged, rusted service tunnel door. I didn't know what was truly down there, what the box really was, if the whistling would start again, or what had happened to Richard the archivist. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I didn't want to find out. I left the sub-basement archive, taking the echoing concrete stairs 2 at a time, not daring to use the elevator, not looking back. I didn't report any of it. Who would possibly believe me? I walked straight out of the old building, into the cool morning air, across the awakening campus, and just quit. Sent an email later citing personal reasons. Never went back. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the eaves of my apartment building, or when old pipes rattle in the walls, I think I hear whistling, faint and tuneless. And sometimes, I dream of Shelf 13C, the damp patch on the wall behind it, and the suffocating feeling of cold, ancient eyes watching me patiently from inside a dusty, unlabeled, unassuming brown box. I don't know if I stopped anything that night, or if I just delayed it, or even if I accidentally made things worse. But I followed the rules, mostly. And I survived. For now.